On Friday night, the city thrummed with life, and I found myself precisely where I wished to be, at my favorite bar. The atmosphere was electric, and I scanned the room, seeking something that would capture my interest. It was not a gay bar I sought, rather, I relished the thrill of the pursuit, the game itself. I could enter any venue and know exactly what I desired and whom I desired. This evening, I spotted him. He sat alone at the bar, his long fingers wrapped around a glass, his lips slightly parted as he savored his drink. He was slender and delicate, his complexion pale as moonlight, with long hair cascading over his shoulders, a dark blonde hue that appeared almost golden in the dim lighting. When he turned just enough for me to catch a glimpse of his striking green eyes, I felt an undeniable certainty. I had always been able to recognize a passive man. It was evident in their movements, in their reactions when they sensed my gaze upon them, and this one was no exception. He was exquisite. I approached him slowly and deliberately, my presence commanding attention in any space, a fact I relished. I noticed how he stiffened slightly, his fingers tightening around his drink before he compelled himself to relax. A challenge, perhaps, but one I was confident I could overcome. "Waiting for someone?" I inquired, leaning casually against the bar, allowing my voice to drop just enough to create an impact. He looked up at me, tilting his head as if weighing the decision to engage. A faint smirk played on his lips, barely perceptible. I chuckled softly, shaking my head. "No, you're not." He raised an eyebrow, amusement evident. "And how do you know that?" I let my gaze wander over him, taking my time to ensure he felt the weight of each moment. "Because you would already be with him if you were." He exhaled a quiet laugh, shaking his head, exuding confidence. I signaled to the bartender, ordering 2 drinks without soliciting his preference. I noticed the way his lips parted, as if he were about to object, yet he remained silent, observing me intently, as if he had already made his decision. "What's your name?" I asked, handing him his drink. He hesitated for a brief moment before responding, "Dean." I repeated the name, savoring it as it rolled off my tongue. It was a fitting description for him, clean, simple, and easy to articulate. In the dim light, he took a sip of his drink, his gaze fixed on me over the rim of his glass. "And you, Han," he said, a slight twitch of his lips betraying a hint of amusement. I smirked, shaking my head. "No, not like Han Solo. More like the man who was about to take you home." I noticed his breath catch, just a fleeting moment, but I was aware of it. He set his glass down, his fingers gliding over the condensation, his eyes locked onto mine. I leaned in close enough for him to feel the warmth radiating between us, close enough for him to envision what it would be like when I had him precisely where I desired. "Yes, that's right." Just like that, the game concluded. He didn't resist when I took his hand. As I led him out of the bar and into the cool night air, he followed effortlessly, as if he had been anticipating this moment, waiting for me. The moment we entered my apartment, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. I barely had time to close the door before he was pressed against it, his body aligning perfectly with mine as if it were meant to be. My hand found its way into his hair, gripping firmly as I tilted his head back just enough to capture his lips with mine, soft, warm, sweet, yet eager. I deepened the kiss, pushing him harder against the door, feeling his body yield to my touch, surrendering without a moment's hesitation. My fingers traveled down his back, over the curve of his waist, drawing him closer, allowing him to sense the depth of my desire. He moaned softly into my mouth, a breathy sound that ignited a rush of heat within me. The night was just beginning. Dean tasted of whiskey and something sweet, something intoxicating that made me yearn to possess him completely. His breath caught as my hands ventured lower, gripping his waist and pulling him against me. I could feel the rapid rise and fall of his chest, the warmth emanating from his skin, and the shiver that coursed through him as my lips trailed along his jaw and neck. I was not gentle, nor did I need to be. He craved intensity, just as I did. His fingers clutched at my shirt, desperate and clinging, his body pressing into mine as if he were unable to. I let out a soft laugh against his skin, my teeth grazing the sensitive area just below his ear. "You always make this so easy, Dean." His breath hitched, producing a quiet, broken sound, yet he still managed to smirk. "Only for the right man." I grinned, tightening my hold on his hips. "Fortunately for you, you found him." In one fluid motion, I lifted him into my arms, his legs instinctively wrapping around my waist as I carried him through the apartment. He gasped, but there was no resistance. He enjoyed it, evident from the way his fingers tangled in my hair and how his lips sought out my neck, planting soft, teasing kisses interspersed with playful bites. I pushed open the bedroom door and gently tossed him onto the bed, standing over him and observing how he sprawled out against the sheets. His long hair fanned around him, creating a perfect picture of breathless anticipation. His green eyes darkened with a wild intensity. I reached for my shirt, removing it slowly and deliberately, allowing him to watch. His gaze followed my movements, his lips parting slightly, fingers pressing into the sheets beneath him. I smirked. "Do you like what you see?" Dean exhaled a soft laugh, but there was a new tone in his voice, something softer, deeper. "I don't think like is the right word." I moved onto the bed, leaning over him with my hands braced on either side of his head. "Good," I murmured against his lips, "because I don't do like." I kissed him again, deep and unyielding, claiming the moment and allowing him to feel the connection between us. He responded immediately, his hands gliding over my shoulders and down my back, pulling me closer as if the space between us was insufficient. His body moved against mine in perfect rhythm, his breath catching in soft, uneven gasps. I let my lips trail down the edge of his jaw and the curve of his throat, feeling him tense beneath my touch. Every shift of his body and every sound he made drew me in further. He whispered my name, his fingers curling into my hair, his breath unsteady. I silenced him with another kiss, slow and deep, my hands exploring. As I traced the contours of his back, the warmth of his skin enveloped me. "I've got you," I whispered, resting my forehead against his, and I truly meant it. The night unfolded, saturated with heat, our hands exploring, whispers exchanged in the soft illumination of the room. We moved together repeatedly, as if time had ceased, as if the world beyond these walls had vanished. The bed, the sheets, and the very air around us bore the weight of our shared moment. Then, the steam from the shower enveloped us, the mirror clouding over as water cascaded in steady streams. Dean pressed against me, his hair damp, his lips still carrying the essence of the night. My hands found their way to his waist, drawing him closer, allowing our bodies to align seamlessly. His head tilted back slightly as I kissed his neck, feeling the warmth of the water trickling over his skin. His fingers glided over my chest, slow and tentative, his green eyes searching mine for more. In a hushed voice, he whispered, "Try me." I smirked, tilting his chin to meet my gaze. The steam enveloped us, thick and warm, muffling the outside world. Dean's skin felt slick beneath my hands, his breath steady yet filled with anticipation. His long, wet hair clung to his shoulders, framing his face, and I couldn't resist running my fingers through it, savoring the sensation. I pressed my palm against his chest, feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat, his quiet exhales blending with the sound of water splashing against the tiles. His hands found my arms, gripping tightly, his touch hesitant yet willing. I smirked against his skin, my lips brushing his ear. "You're still holding back," I murmured, my voice low and teasing. He released a slow breath, his green eyes darting to mine. "I'm not," he replied softly. I laughed gently, tilting his chin up to compel him to maintain my gaze. "Liar." His lips parted, but I silenced him with a kiss, slow at first, then deepening, my hands pressing against the curve of his back as he surrendered completely. His grip on me tightened, the warmth of his body melding with mine as water cascaded down his skin, tracing every contour before vanishing between us. I allowed my hands to explore, mapping the lines of his shoulders and back. The water felt cold, yet we lingered in the shower, and by the time we emerged, the air remained thick with heat, our bodies still damp. I noticed the way Dean moved more slowly now, the earlier tension replaced by a quieter, more content energy. He ran a hand through his wet hair, offering me a small, weary smirk, as if he believed the night had come to an end. I met his gaze with a smirk of my own, knowing it was far from over. I chuckled softly, grasping his wrist before he could step away. "Oh, we're not done," I asserted. He blinked in surprise but did not pull back, instead, his lips curled into a more amused and intrigued smile. "You're always this persistent," he remarked. "Are you complaining?" I replied without hesitation. He licked his lips, watching me intently, taking his time to consider his response before shaking his head and stepping closer. "Not yet." I grinned, wrapping an arm around his waist and pulling him against me effortlessly. I lifted him, his arms instinctively finding their place around my shoulders for balance. He was lighter than he appeared, and I relished how perfectly he fit against me, as if he were meant to be there. I carried him out of the bathroom, the warmth of his breath near my ears sending a thrill of anticipation through me. By the time we reached the kitchen, he let out a breathless laugh as I set him down on the counter, his hands braced behind him, his green eyes sparkling with something unspoken, something expectant. "Seriously, here?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. I ran my hands up his arms to steady him, leaning in slightly, my voice dropping to convey a quiet promise. "You're in my house now." His breath hitched, fingers tightening around the edge of the counter, and I understood that neither of us was going to walk away from this moment. I kissed him again, deep and slow, savoring every second, taking my time. His hands were entwined in my hair, and his legs tightened around me, his body arching into mine. It was never sufficient. I sensed that in the way he held onto me, in the way his breath trembled against my lips, and in the way he allowed me to take precisely what I desired. The kitchen served merely as another playground, another venue to claim him as my own. By the time we returned to the bedroom, the sun was rising over the city, golden light spilling through the windows and casting gentle shadows across the sheets. Dean lay beside me, his chest rising and falling in steady, shallow breaths, his body still warm against mine. I traced languid circles on his skin, observing how he blinked up at me, sleepy yet content. He was meant to leave, that had been the plan. However, as the morning light touched his face, something within me twisted, an unfamiliar feeling that was impossible to ignore. I did not want him to depart, and for the first time, I was not merely contemplating the next encounter, I was envisioning what it would be like if he never left at all. The morning sun cast golden streaks across Dean's skin, rendering him even more ethereal, as if he were a figment of my imagination conjured in the heat of the night. His long hair was tousled against the pillow, and his green eyes, half-lidded, appeared lazy yet sharp, as if he were studying me even now. He should have been getting dressed, that was the customary course of events, and I was well aware of the rules, I had established them. Yet, neither of us had moved. I reached out, tracing a slow line down his chest, feeling the way his breath hitched and his muscles tensed beneath my fingertips. "You're still here," I murmured. His lips curled slightly, and his fingers brushed over my wrist. "You kicking me out?" I should have, that was my usual practice. But instead, I smirked. "No," he exhaled a quiet laugh, shifting against the sheets. "That's a first." It was, indeed, but I chose not to respond. Instead, I leaned in, capturing his lips in a slow, deliberate kiss, drawing him closer and pressing him into the mattress as if I had all the time in the world. He responded instantly, as if he had been anticipating my actions, his hand gliding over my shoulders and trailing down my back. His nails pressed in just enough to elicit a growl against his mouth. He was meant to be merely a fleeting encounter, a name I would forget, a body I would move on from. Yet, the desire to remember him lingered, and I was far from finished with him. I maneuvered him onto his back, pinning him beneath me as his breath came in soft, shuddering gasps. He arched against me, his fingers entwined in my hair, pulling me down for another kiss, this one deeper and more fervent. The morning blurred into a haze of heat, lips, and hands, and by the time we finally separated, exhausted and entwined in the sheets, it was already a new day. Dean stretched, running a hand through his tousled hair, his green eyes locking onto mine with a teasing glint. "Do you always keep your hookups this long?" I smirked, my fingers tracing over his waist. "You always make it this difficult to say goodbye." He chuckled softly, a genuine sound that tightened something within me. He didn't leave, not that day, nor that night. By Sunday, I found myself watching him navigate my kitchen, wearing my shirt as if he belonged there. The sight of him, barefoot and reaching for a cup in my cabinet, with his hair falling over his face, ignited a warmth in me that transcended mere lust. It was something deeper, something perilous, something I was not prepared to define. He caught me staring and smiled. "You always look at people like that." I leaned against the counter, observing him, trying to understand why I hadn't yet told him to pack his things and leave. He tilted his head, feigning contemplation. "Guess I'm special then." I remained silent, pondering the possibility that perhaps he was. When Monday arrived and he still hadn't departed, it became clear he was not just another fleeting encounter, he was something more, something I was reluctant to relinquish. Monday morning dawned, yet Dean remained, and that should have been my first indication that everything had changed. I did not question it when he reappeared in my kitchen, barefoot and sipping coffee from one of my mugs as if it were a routine he had followed for years. Not when he turned to me with that lazy smirk, his green eyes glimmering with an emotion I was reluctant to identify. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed over my chest, observing him. "Are you planning to leave at some point?" I inquired. He let out a soft laugh, placing his cup down. "Do you want me to?" That was the dilemma. I did not want him to go. I had never allowed anyone to linger this long, nor had I ever desired it. Yet, Dean remained, and I found myself lacking any motivation to urge him out the door. Running a hand through my hair, I feigned contemplation, pretending I was not already too invested. "I don't know, you eat my food and take my shirts," I remarked. Dean raised an eyebrow, stepping closer and slipping between my arms as if he belonged there. I smirked, my hands instinctively finding their way to his waist, drawing him closer. "I should probably be tired of you by now," I said, but his fingers traced a slow, teasing path up my chest, his green eyes meeting mine. "But you're not," he replied, his voice low and more intense. His lips curled slightly, and he remarked, "That's a first, huh?" I chose not to respond, for he already understood. Dean did not leave that day, nor the next. By the week's end, his belongings were scattered throughout my apartment, his jacket draped over the couch, his phone charger plugged into the wall, and his scent lingering on my sheets. By the end of the month, he had officially moved in. I cannot pinpoint when I ceased to view him as merely a fleeting presence. Perhaps it was when I began to anticipate returning home to him, to hearing his voice, to feeling his warmth beside me each night. Maybe it was when I found myself reaching for him in my sleep, unable to bear the thought of my bed without him. Or perhaps it was the moment I discovered him half asleep on my couch, curled up in one of my hoodies, his long hair cascading over his face, looking utterly at home in my space. In that moment, the realization struck me, I belonged to him. The man who had never faltered, never lingered, and never required anyone had transformed entirely. Dean had altered everything, and as he gazed up at me with those piercing green eyes, a smirk playing on his lips as if he were already aware of my thoughts, I finally surrendered. I ceased my resistance and drew him into my lap, my arms encircling him, my fingers weaving through his hair, tugging just enough to elicit a laugh, prompting him to tilt his head back and allow me to claim his lips in a deep, lingering kiss. His hands found their place on my chest, his heartbeat steady against mine. He pulled back slightly, his lips still grazing mine as he murmured, his voice teasing yet softer, "Does this mean you love me?" I smirked, my fingers trailing down his spine, pressing him closer. "It means you're not going anywhere." He hummed, his fingers tracing absent patterns on my skin. "That's not an answer." I chuckled, flipping him onto his back, pinning him beneath me, ensuring he felt the intensity of my desire, the depth of my need for him. "I don't do love, Dean," I whispered against his lips. He merely smiled, reaching up to caress my face, his touch gentle and assured. "Yes, you do," he replied, and damn it, he was right.